Well, hello, welcome back. Do you remember the Muslim travel ban first time around? It seems like Donald Trump has put the patients on the crash pads and started resurrecting it because he is now barring entry to the US from nationals of Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan and the Yemen. OK, so not all of them Muslim countries, but predominantly so. What's going on here? Shall we have a little listen to Donald Trump speaking about those travel bans last night?
Very simply, we cannot have open migration from any country where we cannot safely and reliably vet and screen those who seek to enter the United States. That is why today I am signing a new executive order placing travel restrictions on countries including Yemen, Somalia, Haiti, Libya, and numerous others. The strength of the restrictions we're applying depends on the severity of the threat posed. The list is subject to revision based on whether material improvements are made, and likewise, new countries can be added as threats emerge around the world. But we will not allow people to enter our country who wish to do us harm, and nothing will stop us from keeping America safe. Thank you very much.
And thank you, the Donald. So what are the thoughts of Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society? We can find out now. Good afternoon, Alan. When Donald Trump put this in place first time around, and it was the Muslim travel ban, for similar reasons, Joe Biden later reversed it and called it a stain on our national conscience. Is he right to be putting this back in place now? And what are his motivations?
His motivations are border control, basically. This is all part of the America First policy in general. It's about, restricting entry to the US from people who either have countries who he says have citizens who have repeatedly overstayed visas, which is obviously a big problem. Secondly, it's also a national security thing as far as he's concerned. A number of the countries obviously, have connections to rogue regimes or others, and he's saying, look, we just don't want these people in because we can't vet them. So therefore, rather than go through the process of allowing in people who we don't know, it's better to keep them out. And that's his. Now, he's done it in a different way, though, Alex, to last time. Last time he got challenged at the court straight away. He'll doubtless get challenged at the courts now, but this time he's given more reasoning. He's also put exemptions in. So, for example, if you served in the US or helped the US Army in Afghanistan, you're allowed in. If you're athletes, you're allowed in. So he's trying to make, I think, a more reasonable case for what is still quite a sweeping rule, but it's going to clearly have some effect on the border. Note that there are also 7 countries that have got partial restrictions, including Cuba and Venezuela, 2 countries which have been sending people across the US border. So he is, directly from Central America. So I think he's got an eye for the immigration sort of situation here, and that's what is primarily motivating this.
This does, of course, mean that if there are people coming from Haiti, which looks like a hellhole, Eritrea, which probably is a hellhole, Somalia, Sudan, which definitely are hellholes, that if there are people who want to get out of that situation, well, they can't now.
Yeah, well, that of course is a criticism. The criticism is he's damning everyone, isn't he? He's saying, if you're, someone who's legitimately seeking asylum, you're not coming in. And so it is a big move. But don't forget, he got it through the courts last time. It took a long time. He had to modify the plan somewhat, but the Supreme Court said it was perfectly legal. He's going to get it through again. And don't forget, he promised this on the election trail. He said, I will be putting travel bans back in place for countries I deem to be dangerous. So it's not as if the opposition can say he suddenly introduced it from nowhere. It's here, it's planned, it's not an overnight thing like last time. It's going to be, kind of moved in. And I think he's done this in a very different way. I think he's probably learned from the mistakes of the first term.
And do you think this echoes reasonable judgment? That when you look at the list of countries already that are on that travel ban and those lined up to potentially be partially banned or have restrictions, maybe even sort of going the full hog and say you can't come in at all, do you think that this is an honest reflection of risk to America?
Well, I think in part it is, and in part it isn't. So, for example, it was very strange that he cited the Boulder, Colorado terrorist, who, of course, attacked a hostage, an Israeli hostage, march over the weekend. He basically cited this guy, who's Egyptian, as being a reason why it has to, but Egypt's not on the list. So it's a little unclear as to some of the motivations. Equally, you put some of the countries on partial restrictions, some on total restrictions. A lot of, kind of eyebrows raised about Chad, for example. Chad hasn't notably contributed anything in terrorist terms, but he's saying that it's a visa issue there. So I think it's a number of different things that have been thrown into one, kind of measure. And I think unpicking it will be interesting from the perspective of, what might happen in court, and indeed how the administration decides to do it. But the core of it is it right for the president, if he wants to, on national security grounds, say we can't have people coming in from certain countries? The answer is clearly yes. And this is something that he's now enacting.
Do you think on some level it also follows in the vein of his approach when it comes to tariffs, that he might be using this as significant leverage to say to countries where these people are originating, this applies to your country and these are the conditions if you want it lifted?
Possibly, yes. I mean, everything in Trump land is up for negotiation, isn't it? So there's always some way that you might be able to come round and to change change the conditions. For example, if these countries do certain things that Trump might want, he might deem it that actually we can, after all, screen their citizens. I mean, it's fine that we can allow them in again. And it's, what he's doing this for is, I think, firstly, for domestic political consumption. It's something that's going to be popular in America. He's keeping a campaign pledge. And don't forget, Alex, that was one thing he was very proud of in his first term. It was like, I am the politician who actually keeps my pledges. How many politicians do that? I'm doing it again. I said I would do it. I'm doing it. And I think that's part of his rationale as well. It's about appealing to his domestic base, showing that he is a man who fulfills his promises, and maybe there's some, negotiations down the line with some of these countries for things that he might want. But it's a clever policy in the sense that it actually, meets a number of potential targets.
What's interesting is, yet again, he's also cited Europe as part of his reasoning for why he's putting this in place, saying we're not going to let happen to America what has happened in Europe. And of course, at the moment, huge debates on whether it be legal or illegal migration, the nature of who's coming into the country, what their intentions are, our porous borders and national security. Do you think it's reasonable for the UK, whether this government or a future government, to also be looking to impose similar restrictions or bans?
Well, I was having this discussion actually this morning with somebody along the grounds of Iran. Iran's a great example of a country where in the most recent example, and remember there have been many examples of Iranian terror plots in this country. The most recent example, the people arrested, a number of them came in as refugees. Now, we didn't know who they were. We had no clue who these people were and what their background was. It turns out they were assets of the Iranian state, it would appear, or allegedly in that sort of way. So, but there's no way of checking that at the border or checking that on refugee status. So might there be a prima facie case for saying, in the case of Iran, because of the volume of terrorism that's occurred in this country, through Iranian citizens, could we be saying that Iran is a target of a travel ban? The answer would probably, on national security grounds, would be yes. Now, whether we do it or not, it's another matter. But I think you can make a national security case to say it's been proven over the last few years that X cases have come from this country. It's clear we aren't able to monitor who's coming in properly. Therefore, for the sake of security in this country, till it's quietened down, we're going to impose a temporary or permanent travel ban. It would seem to be quite reasonable on national security grounds to be doing that in specific cases.
While I've got you, Alan, one final question, which is a little bit off-piste, but there's been a bit of a ding-dong in reform, it seems, where the latest, the very first, the inaugural Prime Minister's question from their newly elected MP, Sarah Pochin, was challenging the Prime Minister over whether he would consider a ban on the burqa. He said he didn't want to honour that question with an answer. I think if you're asked a question, you should answer it. But the party chairman, Zia Youssef, has turned around and said that question was dumb. What do you think about this? Should this be something that this government seriously considers?
This government's not going to seriously consider this, so therefore there's no point even debating. We know that. This country is so far or this government is so far off the sort of beaten track when it comes to fighting radical Islam, it won't even mention it as a problem. So the idea it's going to go in for banning burqas is not happening. But what this does highlight, though, and this is quite interesting, is that there's clearly a split in reform between people who do want some fairly radical measures and people who don't. And I think it's not the first time. I think the Rupert Lowe case indicates there were other examples of people who have maybe fallen out with Zia Youssef on this issue. And I think, there's probably a big question to be asked within reform. What's your position on radical Islam? Where do you really stand on it? I noticed Nigel Farage has gone quiet on this subject of late. Why has he gone quiet? So I know it's not just a question for the government. I think it's a question for all the political parties. And I think it's notable that the Conservatives have been quite open on this subject, and the other parties want to be shying away from it right now. I mean, individuals not, but on a collective level, I'm struggling to see where political parties are looking at this problem. And given we know it's a growing rather than diminishing problem, and one that's likely to be with us for some time, if you have the government and other prominent parties not dealing with it, voters are going to notice. And I think voters are going to start gravitating towards people who do highlight the problems rather than those who seek to repress conversation about them.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, thank you ever so much.